goal of this podcast is to help you break in and thrive in advertising. And welcome to Adjunct, where we interview the top advertising lecturers and professors across the country to lend some knowledge to your ear without spending thousands of dollars on university credit. Today, Harsha Gangadharbatla leads our lecture as a professor, director of faculty, and leading researcher at the Advertising, Public Relations, and Media Design School at the University of Colorado Boulder. Harsha walks us through how he fell in love with advertising and the link between the critical thinking skills necessary to be successful in advertising as well as in your own life. He is an inspiration to the countless advertising, PR, and media design students who walk through the doors of the University of Colorado Boulder, myself included. Sco Buffs, we coming. As we all know, you need a bulletproof portfolio with work that sets you apart and showcases the next level skills you need as an upcoming strategist, creative, or account leader. It's definitely worth checking out Breaking and Entering's brand new Crowbar Awards, where we release new creative briefs every quarter to inspire great work out of the next generations of talent within advertising and marketing. This quarter, we're lucky enough to have Greg Hahn, co-founder and creative director of Mischief, one of the top advertising agencies on the planet right now. The first place winner will get a legit crowbar to hang above their mantle or break into an agency of your dreams. We do not advise you to break in to an advertising agency of your dreams, but take a photo out front of one of them and send it to us because it's awesome. But now back to the show. This is the Breaking and Entering podcast, Adjunct edition, and I'm your accomplice, Cooper Colvig. Harsha, it's great to have you on the show, and I really appreciate you hopping on.
Thank you, Cooper.
So I like to start my episodes with diving into, your career and kind of how you got to where you are. I know you started your own personal career at Cognizant as a programmer and analyst, and then at some point decided to get your master's and then PhD in advertising. And I would love to know, what drove that shift, how you got to that point, and how you got yourself to teaching from there.
Yeah. So, like everyone else in advertising, I think you take a circuitous path, right? So that's changing now, but most people don't go through college or high school thinking, oh, I want to work in advertising, right? So it's something happens and then you sort of move towards that industry. So yeah, you're right. I actually have an undergraduate degree in electrical engineering, and I started in Cognizant Technology Solutions as a programmer. This was during the Y2K time. So I was programming in COBOL, and the Y2K thing happened, and essentially we were just adding those two new zeros or whatever, right? At some point I realized there's got to be more to life than sitting in front of what we called them then green screen monsters, because COBOL in the IBM mainframes was a green font on a really black screen, right? And then I realized I got to do something more with my life. And then I ran into I was traveling somewhere in India at that time. They have these bookstores and railway stations, and one of the books that was in display was So You Want to Be a Copywriter. I was like, okay, what is that? So I bought the book and I was reading it on my journey. And the first page, it said, I forget now who it was, but the quote was, it said, advertising is the greatest fun you can have with your clothes on. I said, yes, that sounds fun. That sign me up. So yes, I wanted to be a copywriter for a long time. I thought I could, my dream was to work at an agency in New York, living, the starving artist kind of life, writing the next great American novel. But I had no idea how to, because I was at that point, a software engineer, right? So I said, okay, maybe I'll just go get a graduate degree. And I came here to the U.S., Michigan State. And, it was purely by coincidence. Like Michigan State was the first university that offered me admission, and so I just came there. My life would have been completely different if it was a different university, right? Like Texas, for instance. So there are some universities that are very applied in nature, and there's some universities that are more research oriented. So Michigan State was one of those that was more research oriented. So to cut a long story short, I ended up in a program that did more research and understanding of the advertising industry more so than preparing people at the master's level to work in the industry. So I started doing research, and lo and behold, I actually fell in love with that aspect as well, and somehow got persuaded to go on and get a PhD at the University of Texas at Austin, and it turns out to be the best decision because my real love is working in the industry, not necessarily directly, but help through indirectly through my students, right? So I've been teaching now for close to, I would say, almost 16, 17 years now. And it's just amazing to see my students just grow through different ranks and do amazing things in the industry. So that's where I found my calling right now. So that's what makes me the most happy.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, I totally agree. Anytime you talk to anyone who has some sort of experience with the advertising or marketing world, they have some, wild journey of how they either fell in love with it or fell into it. You're obviously no exception. And, with that research background that you kind of gained teaching at Texas Tech and then Oregon and now Boulder and being the director of faculty for the advertising, public relations, and media design school. How have those, past experiences shaped your process as a teacher and your philosophy around it?
Yeah, yeah. So I've been really lucky, working in really amazing places and programs. Texas, for instance, is a really great program. A lot of mentors there, people that I'm still in touch with. One of my mentors from that program moved to University of Oregon and started teaching there, and that was my connection to follow her in that program. By the way, that's another person you should definitely talk to. Her name's Deborah Morrison, if you're intriguing people. Um, so I started working at Oregon in 2008 and then moved to CU Boulder 2013, partly because it was an opportunity to build a program. So there were a small program at the time, about 150 students or so, embedded within the School of Journalism. So people were getting a degree in journalism with the track or specialization in advertising. So the opportunity there was to create a new department and specialization within advertising, public relations, and media design. So I took that, and it's been a decade now. So I worked as the founding chair of that department. So we grew from 150 to about 1,000 students in 5 years. So we hired about 20 plus faculty members in those 5 years. I was the chair. It was an amazing journey. So, at some point I had to go back to doing research, which is my, first love. And that's when I stepped down as the chair of this. So I'm no longer the chair of the department. Back when I think I met you, I was the department chair. But now I work as a faculty director in the provost's office, in the office of faculty affairs, so dealing with other things. So that's my journey in the administrative side of things. In terms of what I've learned in terms of building programs and doing things is that you've heard me talk about this too, is that you can't approach these especially programs in advertising public relations as like specific hands-on applied, which is important, but you have to look at them as a broader skills and creative conceptual critical thinking skills that you're giving students to solve communication problems for brands and issues, right? So if you provide them those broader skills, it doesn't really matter whether it's advertising, public relations, or some other area. The skill set would be, oh, here's a problem, and I will solve this using the creative, critical thinking skills and that I've developed in college, right? So that's the approach that we brought to our program here at CU Boulder as well.
Yeah, it's awesome. And, being a product of the APRD program at CU, I can definitely attest that you guys are doing that. I definitely, in my weird track to marketing and advertising, fell my way into your class. And, when discussing specific topics, you're kind of getting a day in the life view from your guest speakers that you had from local agencies. That's where, I first realized that I fell in love with this thing. And for you, you kind of went the research path, and from there, I wasn't too sure. And I find that more and more people that I talk to as they're entering the industry, they have interests across multiple categories, and that the APRD program at CU was a great way to kind of dip your toes in all different pools of different sizes and gain those different experiences. Are you seeing that the same for other students, and in what ways are you trying to push the boundaries for growing those next generations of advertisers and creatives?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's I love teaching. So back when I was the department chair, I used to teach the large intro class course, and then the very last class that they take, which is the capstone campaigns. So it was my way of seeing, students go through 4 years when they would start as freshmen in my intro class, and then I would meet them again in 4 years in this capstone class, just to see them grow phenomenally and in different areas and their thinking. So it's a way of me looking at, wow, is the program working or not, right? So we've been very lucky to hire an amazing group of talented professors, with PhDs and also people who've worked in the industry. It somehow the magic works and everything comes together. And in the 4 years, when I see them as freshmen, and when they come back, they know everything and they're ready to hit the ground running. And they do produce really amazing work in their campaigns courses. So yes, there's lots of interesting stuff happening here. But I also think that nationwide, across different programs, I'm seeing that there's a lot of interest in, programs that are more geared towards um, social justice issues and things like that. Environmental communication, for instance, the Oregon program is big on that. So those are, I think, a natural fit with the younger generations that want to make a difference. They want to work for companies that, that are sustainable, they're purpose driven, do something positive to humanity. So it's sort of those things are also becoming important. That's one thing I'm noticing as well. In our programs, really good at in building bridges with nonprofits and sustainable businesses and bringing them as clients in our capstone campaigns classes and things like that. So is that what I mean? I tend to ramble as a professor, but is that what you were trying to ask? Is
Yeah.
The direction in which the programs are going, or?
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm actually really glad you brought up the fact that you guys are kind of moving in a social justice direction, because I was in a strategy focused class with Molly Katz at CU. And we were looking at some of the awards and placements for the Jay Chiat Awards that year, which I think was like 2017, 2016. But there was a campaign that stuck out to me from Energy BBDO in Chicago, working with the Off the Streets Club, which is a group that's helping folks who come from harder, tougher areas, get the help and resources that they need, specifically children, a place to go where they can have, safe and strong mentorship. And from joining your class and getting, a broad view of the industry to then having another class where I realized there was real change that I could make within this line of work. It made it incredibly attractive to me. And it's super interesting to hear that that's the direction for a lot of the capstone work that you guys are doing now, and even seeing that in, award show programs outside of schools right now, where briefs kind of are tended like less focused on a specific client, but more of a problem at large. Is that kind of how, it's shifting right now?
Yeah, and then the beauty of our program and other programs too that I admire is that at the end of the day, advertising and public relations, the skills that you pick up in courses and classes and things like that, they could be applied in any context, right? So there's sort of like the toolkit that you pick up. So it's the same principles of persuasion that you would use or one would use to sell soap as well as to sell an idea to conserve energy or to live a sustainable, engage in sustainable behaviors, right? So we leave it up to our students to kind of use it the way they see it, but we definitely want to make sure that they have those creative, conceptual, critical thinking skills, irrespective of where they want to use it in and what context they want to use it in. And the other thing about our program, which I really like, is as opposed to finishing schools, which are great, by the way. I mean, those portfolio schools have a role in the broader industry as well, but I see a 4-year degree being a little different in the sense that what a 4-year college does, it gives you the liberal arts context, and then once they come to our department, we kind of give them the skills. So the skills and the software things that they learn help them get their first job, right? It's the portfolio that they polish and do other things in the junior and senior year would help them get their first job. But then the liberal arts education that they have to take as part of being a Research One university, like, contextual courses like in history, sociology, anthropology, and other electives that they're required to take, prepare them for their last job, which we hope, their first job is not their last job, right? So it helps them grow through that the ranks of the ladder in having a broader societal, socio-political, economic understanding of how the world works, right? So they can keep moving up that ladder. So I think it's the best of both worlds. So we hear, and I see very few programs doing that, right? Texas, Oregon, we have 2 of them that do that, is preparing students both for their first job as well as their last job.
That's super interesting. And I know that was a quote that definitely stuck with me when I took your class. And you're going to pick up things from, school as you go forward, or whether you go to a portfolio school after, and any of those jobs that you have, even far further into your careers, to know you're making sure that you're, picking up those new skills to continue, getting to, the top of that ladder, whatever the top of the ladder looks like for you. Yeah. And it's super interesting, bringing in the perspective of how a 4-year liberal arts degree can kind of broaden the perspective of it. So you can kind of make those decisions too, while you're, climbing the rungs, but also identifying what rungs you want to be climbing, I think is super interesting. And I guess makes me a little bit curious too, if we're talking about those, creative concepting and critical thinking skills that you're making sure to build in your entire program. How do you balance that with the tangible assets like a well-written portfolio, or experience with problems, and have a way to document it and bring that to the entry-level role in the advertising world to help tell your own story?
Yeah, definitely. Well, one of the other things we do in our program is this philosophy. And although we don't explicitly say it, but I see it in our program, there's this idea that learning happens through doing, right? So learning by doing, and this is a fundamental shift, I think, back from when me or my generation or older generations went to school, where you would have a professor stand in front and give lecture or whatever, and you would take notes, and then you would. So that's learning by information, right? And that's an older paradigm. And now I think there's been a paradigm shift in that the information that professor can typically provide is everywhere, right? It's a search of one search or tip of your finger, whatever, through Google and other. And now we have AI enabled, search and chat and other things as well, right? So that paradigm shift happened, and I see more and more as I teach now. Students are in this newer paradigm where they learn things by doing, right? Not necessarily sitting and hearing about it. So we've adopted that model in our program. So most of our classes, I would say, except for the intro class, even then they work in groups and projects and things like that. But most of our upper division classes have a real world client that they work on and produce things, right? So all of those are opportunities for students to create the content and the evidence that they could use when they go out into the industry, whether it's a portfolio, whether it's a strategy deck, research that they've done, things like that, or a media plan that they've created in their media planning course. So all of those courses are geared towards producing that evidence. And we also have now a creative track and a design track. So people apply to that and work, you know, um, exclusively on their portfolios and doing things that you would typically do at a portfolio school. So we're kind of trying to give them the best of both worlds. Portfolio schools obviously they do that 24/7. It's harder to do that in a 4-year setting, but our students compete with the portfolio schools, as you know. At the one show a few years back, we were ranked in the top 5 programs in terms of number of pencils that we won and things like that. So yes, there is an emphasis on creating opportunities to gather as much evidence as they can, that could showcase their skills rather than just a one-dimensional resume that most people in other programs might have, right? So
Yeah, and we have the Crowbar Awards with Breaking and Entering that started this quarter as well too, where we're going to be having Greg Hahn as our first guest judge, as a another similar opportunity to give students from across the board and people who are 3 years and under in advertising a shot at getting more exposure and working on their portfolios too. Which I think, to your point, a lot of times the important parts are the creative concepting and creative critical thinking skills. But then having, a target to point that at is always, key. And that's where I think those, at least in my experience with APRD, those capstone classes where you get to work on, a real client and solve a problem for them, kind of brings it all together and learn by doing. And that's how we all get better in our careers, whether you're 5 years in, 10 years in, et cetera. You have to continue pushing the boundaries and learning. And it makes me a little bit curious. In the last 5 to 10 years, there's definitely a wave within the agency world where they're searching for talent outside of the traditional portfolio or university school education. Like Wyden had the Kennedy's program. I think they might still be running it. And Crispin had like the crash course program where they were looking for people without traditional advertising backgrounds to bring in into like an incubator like setting. Has a shift like that affected the way that you teach or prep your students at all? Or, what's your kind of view on that trend within the advertising world?
yeah, I can see why program ad agencies would do that, because the whole idea of working in advertising is coming up with creative, innovative, never thought of out of the box ideas, right? And unfortunately, I think majority of the programs all do similar things. It's cookie cutter, right? You could really substitute your degree and say, uh, like some other program, and you wouldn't know the difference because everyone takes the same set of classes, everyone does the same, works on the same kinds of projects and things like that. So I can see them doing that, right? And it makes sense because if you want fresh thinking, you got to go outside and bring in people that are, with a different background, like English, sociology, psychology, and other areas. So we've kind of known that for a long time, and that's where the idea of like preparing students for problem solving, communication problem solving, rather than working in a particular ad agency or particular PR agency as the focus, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I think still we do have a lot of students come to us because they want to work at an agency, but we've consciously made this effort to like make them think beyond an agency, right? Your skill set translates to a whole different context, whole different areas. So if you can think creatively, strategically, understand a problem, come up with really cool ideas to solve it, you could apply that in a bunch of other areas, which could be technology. You could work at a tech firm. There's other areas or nonprofits. Like a Clinton initiative or global initiative or something like that, right? So to counter the agency way of looking at it, right? So they're going outside the ad programs to get new ideas. We're sort of preparing our students to go beyond the agencies because we want them to go where the puck is, right? In a hockey metaphor, like agencies are great if you can get it, but they're limited jobs, right? And there are also certain issues with agencies in terms of you know um, underrepresentation of certain groups and things like that. And also, if you ever been in an agency, you would see that majority of them are under 40, right? So there's never anyone older than that. So it's also sort of a system which wants there's a high turnout of young talent that can stay there 15, 14 hours or whatever and work, right? So in such a situation, you would want our students to think beyond and see where else can you take your skills, right? And in the past, it's been amazing to see your students pick up those skills and take them to really cool areas, right? So some of them work for environmental agencies and things like where you wouldn't normally as an ad major think of going, right? So those would be the things that I think we and as well as other ad programs should be thinking about is how can we prepare students for a world beyond the agency world.
Yeah, I totally agree. It definitely feels like, whether you have the traditional education or not, that paired with a diverse background is a great way to set yourself apart even further. Whether you're pointing straight at an agency or beyond, and absolutely, there's tons of churn within that industry, and I feel like a lot of times I hear. The conversation, or we use the rungs in the ladder metaphor, where people go to the agencies in their early career to get a broad knowledge across varying sets of industries and kind of intensive creative work, which is its own value prop. But that then the next rung is to go in-house somewhere or to divert to a different type of agency. Are these conversations that you're used to having with your students, or is it more of a case by case basis, just based on the person's situation and their goals and where they'd like to go?
Yeah, it's both. I mean, we talk about it in our classes a little bit too, but then there are also examples of students who've, gone not just beyond an agency, but beyond the industry itself, right? Like, it's so amazing to see. For instance, I have a student, I should give her a shout out, Morgan Gallo. I don't know if she were in the cohort or not. She may have been, but she was also in my intro class. But she's a comedian, right? So she's figured out a way to use her advertising skills to kind of create huge. I think she has like 300,000 or 400,000 people following her on TikTok and social media, right? So she's used some of her advertising skills to kind of promote herself on social media platforms. And it really helps too that she's amazing and incredibly funny. So those are some examples that I can think of where people are taking their skills to completely different areas, right? And so I have former students who are now in nursing school. I have another student who was in one of my classes, and I saw in him, he was a natural leader, like sort of he would stand up and present in a way that made me think of him as like, oh, you know what, you would be really good in a courtroom or in the Congress even. You should think about running for office, right? He kind of took that to heart, and he said, you know what, I'm going to go to law school, and he went to law school, and he's now in law school, right? So there are ways in which you can and I really hope that's what the students would get out of, these creative programs. Creative in the sense that what I'm talking about is advertising is a creative field, right? Not just necessarily portfolio copywriting or direction, but anything that has the creative industry aspect to it. To take those skills to really apply them to these broader industries and areas that wherever their heart takes them, right, and they're naturally good at and can really apply their skills. And that could be anywhere, right? So once you take away the limitation of here's the ad industry or PR industries you work in, it just opens the field up to doing anything. I mean, you could run for office, you could run for Congress, and things like that that get opened up. And the possibilities that I see in the students is what really excites me. And I hope, at the end of the day, everyone finds things that they're really passionate about. And, as somebody said, late, if you find something you really enjoy doing, you never have to work a day in your life.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And it kind of triggered me to, think about how, firstly, I'm curious about how many students you have coming back to you to chat about, the new industries that they've gone into. But within the like content creator world that we live in now, more and more people, and even in younger generations than I or you are finding new ways to have success as a content creator and defining and building their own brand. And use the example as a student who became a comedian and used the skills from the program to bring that to life. It really feels and just sounds like it's a great program to find success in life and give those core skills of critical thinking and solving creative problems as different you never know what life's going to throw at you, and you don't know what new industry you could get pulled into or fall into. But it's really awesome to hear that that's kind of the world you're creating, or that bubble that you're creating within the advertising, PR, and media design school at CU.
Yeah, there's so many other examples too. I mean, I have to say that majority of our students still go into and want to work in the ad agencies and ad industry, but there are a few of them that kind of transition to other industries as well. I have another student of mine who works in the cannabis industry, right? So he's a really great graphic designer. And, I would talk to him and he would be in the class and I'd say, you know what, if you're really passionate about this, then you could make a career out of this, right? So then he started designing things he was a bud tender too. So he did a lot of cool stuff that led him to a job. And now he's, designing courses for bud tenders, right? So how do you bud tend, right? Like what are the basic principles and things like that? So you could really, the sky is the limit. You can apply your skills in a wide variety of fields.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I mean, obviously that's kind of a no-brainer with Boulder too. And I think that was something that was used in a lot of our design work projects because it's right there. You have an industry that is booming and is going to only continue to, and is pretty infant and is looking for, ripe young talent who has out of the box thinking to help, bring those products or even processes within those companies to life. And I guess it makes me curious too, how is the APRD program there, a place that kind of fosters building strong relationships between either, students amongst their peers or, students to the different professors or the networks that professors have to, reach those places that they're looking for?
Yeah, so I mean, our program, I think we're incredibly lucky to be in Boulder and obviously Denver area where there's a lot of ad agencies and creative energy, right? It's one of those places that naturally attracts people that are like-minded and creative and entrepreneurial and want to do things. So when I first moved here, I made it a point to like network with all the agency folks here. And, one of my good friends, which by the way would be a great person to talk to or interview, his name is Jonathan Schoenberg. He's a partner at TDA, right? So he's a really good friend of our program, and through him and others I've met, we make it a point that that industry connection is there with their students, right? So they can really take advantage of talking to people, connecting, whether it's through guest speaking, guest lectures, and things like that, or portfolio reviews in our creative sequence. Yeah, or we also have a number of them teaching classes for us. When you mentioned, Molly Katz, I met her when she was at Cactus, I think, director of strategy there, and I recruited her to come teach our class, right? So those are some ways in which, as a former department chair, I made sure we were connected to the industry and the goings on in the industry. So that's one way we really keep our students connected with what's going on in the industry. So that, and they also, go on. We have an ad club. They go on agency tours and meet with different people in New York. And before the pandemic, they used to. But I think it's going to come back again, and they're going to go to San Francisco or New York and meet with agency folks and things like that. So I think we're uniquely positioned being in Boulder, and we really do take full advantage of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a bit of a leading question on my end. I'm not supposed to admit that leading a podcast, but I mean, I found my first, agency gig with Michael Stoner at year one, and then worked with Mark Heason and his consulting group out of school. And that's where, I was able to get my start and even, have, close connections with a lot of the people that you mentioned. And even, doing this interview with you now, there's definitely a strong collaborative culture between like the real world and education within that program that I think is proving to be successful for a lot of folks. Plus, you have just an incredibly creative area in general. It's really cool to see, and that it's continuing to grow and move forward from there.
Yeah, no, for the people, I guess, especially if there are students listening, I would say, you know, as my mentor Deborah Morrison used to say, the real magic happens between this in the space between classes, right? As I said, everybody takes the same courses. Everybody, whether in the program in Illinois, Michigan State, Georgia, Florida, all of these ad programs, you're all taking the same classes. Research methods, strategy, media planning, sort of thing. What really sets you apart is what you do with your time in between classes, right? So think of yourselves as you're coming into your program, wherever that is, with a huge empty container, right? And what you do between classes to fill those containers is what's going to set you apart from everyone else or the 2,000 students that are in across the nation in ad programs, right? So that's one thing I would strongly recommend people, if they're looking for things for advice, I would say, make the best of the opportunities and the time that you have between classes, whether it's a hobby, whether it's writing, music, whatever that sets you apart, build on those things, right? At the end of the day, you want to be the interesting person who walks into the room, and not just, a cookie cutter ad grad that comes out of a program.
Yeah, I hear you. And I know there are a lot of, feelings on either side of this, whether it's advertising or any industry, but you have, AI, that's the center of discussion right now. And before that, specifically within advertising, the word data driven, was in everyone's mouth at some point in either a pitch or a conversation. And I know one of the fears that I see and hear a lot about from people is that, well, if we're bringing in AI and we're bringing in more data into the work that we're doing, and I'm sure there are conversations that are happening in your classes around these technologies and how they can be helpful. There's also that fear of, how it can take away or how we play a role with these new technologies now. How are you kind of fostering that creative environment to, have people really bring in what makes them them and get the most out of these technologies to where it's not, data washing the conversation or the work that's getting done?
Yeah, no, it is a really interesting development in AI and big data world, right? So yes, there is obviously the fear that, and it is, valid to an extent, because I do agree that in the near foreseeable future, anything and everything that can be automated will be automated, right? So as somebody going into the industry, then you would want to think about skills and toolkit that you're building, that is hard to automate, right? So, and I would say, hopefully it's really a long time before computers are able to replicate human creativity, right? Like that's one of the bread and butters of our industry. I think and there is a lot of significant work being done in the AI realm, but I strongly believe that the because computers kind of predict things, right? They're really good at predicting, and so going outside of those patterns, I don't know if you can algorithmize creativity to an extent that it would be. The people are trying, and it is a scary world. But I think that's the last bastion in this sort of war against machines, right? I think humans have an advantage in creativity and emotions and feeling things, whatever we want to call that, as consciousness or whatever it is. That's the thing I think that still separates us and from the machine. So in terms of AI, that would be one thing. In terms of data, though, I think you're right that there's a lot of data, but the skill set that is missing is um, interpreting that data, right? So everyone you can treat yourself to like crunch those numbers and run those regression models or time series or what have you, and pull up charts and bar graphs and things like that. But I think we still need humans to interpret those and see the insights of those, right? I think that may be where we still are a little bit relevant. At least for now, before computers, I guess, take over and singularity kicks in.
Yeah, let's hope that it's a long time before that day comes. But I totally agree. And, folks at in-house or at agencies and in any industry, I think it's widely regarded as such an incredible skill as a creative to be able to read between the lines, draw out those insights, whatever they may be, for a consumer world or client problem. And that's where the money is made, and that's where the most growth will be too. That's where when you, even if we bring it back to advertising, find those campaigns that kind of hit you in the chest a little bit, it's usually because some creative or strategist, maybe an account person, found something that, and an unspoken human truth that was lying in the data, whether it was in an interview or just them living their own lives. It is really cool to see, that tool getting used to, like, that tool being data used to its full potential and really kind of pushing the work forward a bit.
Mm-hmm.
So I like to wrap up the show of Adjunct with any advice that you share or would like to share with your current students, and how you'd like to share that with students across the country or people who could just learn from it.
Yeah, sure. I think I have about 4 or 5 things that I usually tell my students in the last day. So you probably have heard this spiel and the last day of class, as all of my students. So I usually start my last day of class talking about 4 or 5 things to think about, right? And these sometimes go beyond the advertising industry. Some of them are really specific to the advertising industry. But the number one thing for me is curiosity. I think everyone has to have a sense of curiosity, right? So, going back to the times when you were a 6-year-old, right? You would constantly probably ask, why? Why is that, right? At some point, somebody said, enough, no more why. That's just the way things are, right? And there's so many people like Charlie Roberts and other people who talk about the creative process and how our education system is sort of set up to like kill that creativity, right? So it's so counterintuitive because curiosity is one of those things that really takes you far in life. But then we design an entire education system to kill that curiosity, follow orders to get your grade or whatever, right? So I would say first thing, bring back the curiosity, ask why. If you're curious about things, pull that thread, find out, right? Pick up a magazine you've never read, talk to a stranger, talk to people that that don't usually agree or line up with your views or something, right? Learn from those things, right? Number two would be um, I would say give a shit, right? I guess you could bleep that out. But essentially care about things. If you go through your life without caring about things, that's just to me, you've wasted such amazing in potential, right? We all are unique in our ways, and we bring so many things to this world. And if you just go through life not without caring about anything, and it doesn't have to be advertising, right? Care about something. If it's peeling a potato, you do it with like devotion, right? Figure out everything and like just give a damn, right? So that would be one thing. And those are so many things you could care about: environment, issues of equality, things like that. And then I would say number three is something that I apply in my own life is never compete or compare yourself with others. Always compete against yourself, right? So you look at people around and say, "Oh man, he got a job. I wish I was in there." Like that is a recipe for disaster, right? So the minute because there's always somebody better, there's always somebody worse. That's a battle you're never going to win. The only person you should compete with is you. You get up every day, you look in the mirror and say, are you better than the person you were yesterday? What did you do the entire day that made you better? Right? If not, go back to the drawing board, create things. Okay, I'm going to change. I'm going to run, 3 miles every day. I'm going to learn a language on Duolingo, whatever it is, right? That's the person you need to be competing with, the person in the mirror, right? And number four is more specific to the advertising industry. Unfortunately, the way things work in the advertising industry is not as much as what you know as who you know. So networking is a really big, important aspect. So that wherever you are, whichever program you're in, when you have guest speakers coming to your class, find them on LinkedIn, and talk to them and thank them for coming to class or whatever. Don't approach these relationships with the transactional lens, right? Like, what can this person do for me? Lens. Never do that. Like, think of it as a genuine relationship that you're forming, because you never know who can open what doors for you at what stage in life, right? So building those networks is an important thing. And related to competing against yourself is this personal brand, right? Um, I think it's attributed to Jeff Bezos, but maybe someone else said it. But it's essentially your brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room, right? So you have to work towards carefully crafting that brand, right? Because whether you do it or not, it gets built, it gets created. So work towards creating that brand of yours. And last thing I would say is, advertising industry is an incredibly generous industry. Like I've never seen people, counter to what most people might think. Actually, people if you ask like, oh, advertising, but really, people that work in the industry are incredibly generous. Like I pick up my phone or I send an email, say, hey, I would love to have you come. I've never met. You don't know who I am. It would be great if you could come talk to me, talk to my class. Immediately they say, yes, I would love to do that, right? So it's a very generous industry, very giving industry. So be generous, right? Be a kind person, because that goes a long way in life as well. So those are the things I have.
I love it. Thanks, Harsha. I think it's a great way to sum it up and kind of the beauty of the breaking and entering platform as a whole, giving people access to Harsha's 4 tenets of being an awesome creative in person at the end. But that's what we're here for as well, too. If anyone ever wants to reach out to either myself or Gino or anyone at the breaking and entering team and ask any questions, access our network, always do. That's what we're here for. And we really appreciate you coming on, Harsha, and sharing all this with us and getting to pick your mind a little bit and share that with the world.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This was fun.
Thank you so much for listening to this entire episode of the Breaking and Entering Advertising podcast. If you like what you heard, it would mean a lot to us and help us grow and get better guests and better break-ins if you can go to Apple Podcasts and leave us 5 stars and a small review if you have the time. Be sure to connect with our guests if you like what they said by going to our Instagram at Breaking and Entering Pod. That's all one word, Breaking and Entering Pod on Instagram. We have links to their portfolios and their LinkedIn, and they want to connect, so do that. And thank yous. Thank you to Mikey Malarkey, our audio engineer, and Buchan Jung, our creative director. Can't do it without you two, and a team from the University of Illinois. It's a student team from the agency called AdBuzz. They're a PR agency, and it's been a pleasure working with them. Thank you all so much, and we will see you next week with another amazing guest.